Good evening. The question this evening is, was the Bible changed? And I came upon this question from a Muslim who says Allah sent down the Torah and Injil, which means the four Gospels, or the Gospel, I guess. He watched his book be hidden and its teachings changed. Then the Quran was revealed directly to the hearts of people so that no one could challenge it. Okay, so do you get the idea that Muslims have this idea that the Bible was changed by man? So this is why they had to come up with the Quran, right? Now, what I'm going to tell you is this is a very common misconception. It's a common misconception, and it's a misconception that I had originally when I started reading the Bible or looking into the Bible to find out what it was about. And I falsely assumed that because the Bible had been translated over time, that it had been changed and that the meaning was lost and that the true teaching had been lost. And this is not the case. This is absolutely not the case. Now, the Bible was changed a long time ago, around 1100 BC, and I'm going to tell you what it was changed into. But it wasn't changed the way the Muslims think. It wasn't changed. And the reason why I falsely assume this, and the reason Muslims falsely assume this, and the reason why other people who hear about Christianity falsely assumed that at some point there must have been some dramatic change in the Bible which diluted the original teaching, and now we have kind of this other story with Jesus and we don't really understand it. And that's why the Muslims had to make their version, which we don't really believe that either, because us Westerners, we don't really believe that. We think, well, you didn't like the story, and so you just rewrote another version. But we kind of agree that, well, it must have been changed, and so all this kind of thinking is actually false. And I also had these ideas at one time that the Bible must have been changed. Now, there could have been some changes that occurred around the time of the Nicene Creed as far as Roman propaganda entering in here or there or something like that. Or the fact that Luke Acts appears to have been written much later. But the basic story of Jesus in the four Gospels is still intact, and the teaching hasn't at all been changed. And I've covered that in other videos, and I'm going to go over that briefly. But the thing is also with the Old Testament, people tend to think, well, there must have been another version, and that over time this version may have been changed too, and we're all very uncertain about it. So I'm going to clarify this for you right now in a way that you've never thought of it before. But so I've had these questions. The whole entire Islamic world has this question. People in Europe have had this question for a long time. The Jews have this question. Different Christian denominations have had this question. The Freemasons sought to purify their understanding of the religion by abandoning everything and just go and trying to find their own path to understanding what the Israelites were really about. So this has been a huge topic for centuries, okay? And I'm going to tell you, I know exactly how the Bible was changed. And you're going to know too, and it's going to be so obvious to you when you know it. But it wasn't changed the way we presume it was. Because we all assume, like the Muslims do, that there was one God, and this one God had a message, and he delivered it to humans. And those humans, of course, would change it and make alterations, and so over time, it wasn't really the same message anymore, and it got diluted. Now, that is not the case, because, in fact, they've done a very good job of translating the books and maintaining the translations over thousands of years. They've actually done a very good job of writing word for word, and when they've translated it from one language to another to find the closest meaning of that each sentence in those paragraphs, to make sure they're as close as possible to the original meaning. They've done a very good job of that. The scribes have done a very good job of that. So there hasn't been any dramatic change to that degree. So what was changed? I'm going to tell you that we all presume that there's one God and he had one message, and then man wrote that over centuries, and it changed over centuries and it got diluted. That's not what happened. That is not what happened. So the way that the Bible was in fact changed is explained in the Bible itself. And what's explained in the Bible itself is that you had all these pagans, or polytheists is actually a better explanation, is that they worshipped many gods, right? And as the Israelites came out of Egypt and they came into these territories in Canaan, they were instructed to destroy the altars and the idols and to replace it with their religion, this new religion. So you got to understand is that the basic concept of the Israelite religion is that they're destroying the gods of these other people and they're replacing it with their religion, with their God. Okay? So Jerusalem, for instance, was originally a pagan temple of many gods. In Jerusalem was a temple to many gods, and many gods were worshipped at Jerusalem before the Israelites arrived with monotheism, or with their God, the God of the Israelites. Before it was worshipped the God of the Israelites, it was a polytheistic temple, and it had been for thousands of years, and it had always been that. So what does that tell you about the Bible? That tells you how the Bible was changed. And this is confirmed by the records that we find in Iraq and throughout the Middle East and also in Egypt, is that we find the original books of the Bible. Not all of them, but when we look back in Genesis, we have the flood story and the creation story in Enuma Elish, and we have the story of the food of immortality in the myth of Adapa. And what we see in those stories is we see that they were originally polytheistic, and that these were originally the stories of the people who worshipped many gods. And these stories were changed and replaced with the God of Israel. And so that's how the book was changed. The book wasn't changed that there was one God and he delivered this message to the people, and then over time they diluted the story and it became more polytheistic or more pagan, and these were the errors. That's not what happened. What happened is the story began as the story of the Anunnaki. It began as a story of many gods. And it changed into the story of the God of Israel. And that's how it changed. And the flood story is a perfect example of this change. And when you look at the flood myth and you look at the Genesis version and you compare that to the version of the Anunnaki, then you see who the God of Israel is and why it was changed and why it's not the same religion and why they thought their religion was better and why they thought it was so much better that they're going to replace these other gods with the new God. Because that's what they did. They replaced the gods of the cities in Canaan with their God, the God of Israel. They replaced the temples of the Canaanites with their God, the God of Israel. And they replaced the books of the ancient people of the Levant with their God now in their old pagan books, in their old polytheistic books. So, for instance, in the flood myth of Noah, in the original story, everyone, the flood occurs because the gods just find people annoying, and they just want to kill them off because they're annoying, and the people don't want to die, and so one of the gods who created mankind, called Enki, comes along and he tells Ziusudra is one of the names used. There's different names used depending on which version of this story you get. There's Ziusudra, and there's Utnapishtim, and there's Xisuthros, are three of the versions that are common. So what happens is Enki, or Ea, he's also called Ea in some of the books, comes down to the character Ziusudra, or Noah, and tells him to build an ark because there's going to be a flood, and the gods, plural, are going to kill everybody, so you better get on this boat, because Enki wants to save mankind from these other gods that are his friends, but they want to kill mankind. Enki created man in the story, right? So Enki makes the man, and he thinks that man is an interesting creature that he's designed. But the other gods don't find it so interesting, and they're like, we're going to kill these people. Are they're inhabiting the earth. We don't like them. We're just going to have a big flood and wipe them out. That's the story, right? Now, that's not the story in the Bible in Genesis, but you can see, like, when you talk to an atheist, why does God go around just killing everybody? And it's like a good question. Like, why is there a story about God killing everyone in the flood? Well, because in the original myth, the gods didn't want these humans here, so they were going to kill them off. They didn't care about them, right? But this one god did, and he went down to tell them to build an ark. So that's the original. So now, what happens in the Genesis version? Because now we have a new God, and this is the key to understanding who the God of Israel is. We have this new God, and this God of the Genesis flood story loves justice, and he loves what is right, and he loves doing what is right and being virtuous and doing what is correct and being true. You see, and Noah is said that he walks with God, meaning he does what is right. He's a good person. And this is why God saves him in the Genesis story. Do you see how this is different? See, in the polytheistic Anunnaki story, Enki saves man just because he's a man. And Enki made these men. He doesn't want them to get killed because he likes his creation called man. These other gods just don't like it, and they're going to go kill them all off with a flood. Whereas in the Genesis story, the God of Noah likes truth, likes justice, likes those who are righteous. And what he says in the Genesis story is that all these people are doing evil. They're doing evil things on the earth, and so we're going to have to kill them off. He says the God of the God of the books of Genesis says all these other people are doing what is wrong. They're being evil. They're wicked. And so they have to go. But Noah, he's just, and he's good, and he's righteous. So we're going to save him and his family. So what is that story telling you? What it's telling you is the God worshipped by the Israelites who wrote the story are saying that we worship the God who loves truth. We worship the God who loves justice. We worship the God who loves doing what is right, and who hates all this evil and sickness and viciousness that we see in the earth, all the despotism and all the degeneracy. So that's what God doesn't like in the new religion. So you can see in the new religion, this is why it's not the same religion as the Anunnaki religion. Because in the Anunnaki religion, everyone's going to die on the earth because they're humans, and the gods don't like humans, so they're going to get rid of them. Whereas in the Israelite version, there's a dimension of morality to it that they wrote in there. So they're explaining. So they're taking this old myth that was an old pagan polytheistic myth, and they're changing the meaning of it to teach you something. So now, that's how you know who the original God of the Israelites is and what the original teaching is. And that teaching is then carried on through other books of the Bible into the story of Jesus Christ. Now, there's another Muslim that said this other thing I'm going to show you in a second here. And he had let's see if I can find it real quick. He had a response to somebody saying that Jesus was rejected by his people, and that this is proof that Jesus wasn't God. Okay, see if I can find the quote. I might not be able to find it fast enough for you here. He says that Jesus was rejected. This is a common thing that Muslims believe. Muslims believe that. That's proof that the fact that the Jews rejected Jesus is proof that he was wrong. You see, they don't understand the story. I don't think I'll be able to find it for you, but I'll just I don't think I'll be able to find it for you in time. So the Muslims will say that the fact that Jesus was rejected by the Jews, by the rabbis, is proof that he wasn't the Messiah because they rejected him. Not understanding the story. So here's a whole continuation of why the Muslims wrote the Quran, because they didn't understand the story, right? They didn't understand the story. They haven't read the four Gospels. If they do read them, they don't understand what they're reading, which I don't really can't blame them for that, because it's such a complex story. that most Christians don't really fully understand the story of the Gospels either. There's a lot of Christians that I've spoken to that are very confused about the story. I'll give you an example. I've spoken to Christians and argued with them just this afternoon who don't know what lost sheep means. And there's this, that's what, you have this whole philosophy called Christian identity. And they believe that Christians are the true Israelites. And I'm not saying that Christians aren't the true Israelites, but they think it's all a racial thing, and that God and that Jesus came for the lost sheep, meaning them, the people who went to Europe, which makes no sense when you actually read the book, right? So in the story of Jesus, the lost sheep are the ones following the rabbis, and Jesus comes to they've gone astray, they're lost. See, and so just that one term, lost sheep, you have this whole cult of people that came out of the side of lost sheep. Oh, the lost sheep, that must be the tribes that were lost, and they went up into Europe, and that must mean us. No, you can't read. You're illiterate. Okay, lost sheep means you've gone astray. You're following the rabbis. Now, so I bring that up as an example of Christians themselves not understanding what they're reading. Muslims don't understand it either. So Muslims read the story of Christ and they get confused by it because they don't understand what an allegory is. They can't read an allegory. And so literally it doesn't make sense. And because they can't understand what an allegory is, then they're like, well, we're just going to rewrite the story of Jesus, and we're just rewriting it. We're going to say that God told us to do that. Now, so here's another example of just not understanding the story. So, do I need to cover the story of Jesus again? I don't know. I already told you that it's an allegory about the rabbis starting their own traditions, which didn't come from God, and then the people following them were called the lost sheep. And they were astray, and so Jesus represents God's word that comes to bring them back to God, right? And so Jesus, because it's told as a story of a man, a living man, the Jews, of course, today they read that book and they go, "No man is our God," and then the Muslims go, "How can a man be God?" And both the Jews and the Muslims don't understand that in an allegory, because the Israelites wrote allegories, it's an allegory about God's word becoming a man and being murdered by the rabbis because they rejected God's word in favor of their own traditions. I could say that till I'm blue in the face, and I just said it right now, and half the people won't understand what I just said. So I don't know how I can keep repeating the same thing over and over and over and over again, and people just don't get it. But that's what it says. The book. That's what the book's about. That's why Jesus is killed at Golgotha. You probably already know that. You don't want to hear me say it again. But there's people where I say that to them over and over and over again, and they just don't get it because they don't know how that could possibly be an allegory, and they don't know how God could become a man. And I just told you it's an allegory. I could say that till I'm blue in the face. They'll never understand it. There's just some people that can't comprehend an allegory. See if I can find this quote that I'm looking for. I'm not able to make comments on this Muslim debate group because I asked a question in this forum, which was, what was Muhammad's real name, and I was stricken from commenting after that. Of course, no Bedouin is going to name their child the Praised One. Can you imagine you have a baby and you name it the Praised One? Nobody did that in the old days. So anyway, what was the question here? Hopefully I can find it. Oh. I don't think I can find it. No, they've really hijacked Christianity, though, in Islam. It's really sad, actually. So they didn't understand the story, and then what they've done is they've totally. Oh God. They're not the only ones, though. It's a common thing to get confused by the story and then teach a false version of it or whatever. I can't find it. Can't find what I'm looking for. I guess I'll just call it quits on this one. Okay, so to wrap it up, the only thing I really need to tell you in this video is that the way that the Bible has changed is it started out as a book about many gods, and then it changed because now the Israelites that came about out of this culture that had these books about many gods, now they say there's one God of Israel, and it's the God of truth. It's the God of justice. It's the God of righteousness. And this is the God that they wrote in over all these other gods. And that's how they did away with the gods in the Bible. That's how they did away with all these other gods that used to be in the Bible. And that's why in Genesis it says, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Because that's the Anunnaki. That's the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki are not aliens. That's another thing, is they had this whole stuff about the aliens and Anunnaki being aliens. I'm not saying there aren't aliens, but the Anunnaki are not aliens. The Anunnaki was the wind, was the chief god, was the wind. Like Baal is the storm god. Baal el Ilu. Okay, Ilu is wind. And Lil was the wind, the god of the wind. He was the chief god of the pantheon. So the god of wind and storms, that was the chief god. Above all the other gods, that was the most important god. And that's why in Lil, and that's where you get Ilu, and that's why God breathes the breath into Adam. He breathes the Ilu, the breath. The spirit is connected to wind, and that's the connection they make there between breath and spirit. So God and God goes, like the wind is coming across the deep in Genesis. That's the air is moving across the deep. That's the Ilu. That's the chief god of the pantheon. Now, that, of course, was changed by the Israelites into what? Into the God of justice, righteousness, doing what is right, being true, being virtuous. So all the pagan deities of the Bible were changed into the God of Israel. And I'll end off on that.